Hello. Welcome back to STM Narratives. Before we begin, please comment where you are watching from and the time. In a city where wealth and poverty exist side by side, an unexpected encounter changes the lives of two men forever. One is a millionaire, accustomed to luxury and the comforts of life. The other, a homeless man who has nothing but his wits and a heart full of courage. When fate brings them together on a dark alley during a violent robbery attempt, the homeless man's bravery saves the millionaire's life. What follows is a journey of gratitude, redemption, and a reward far beyond anything either of them could have imagined. This is a story of contrasts: wealth and poverty, fear and courage, despair and hope. But above all, it's a story about the transformative power of kindness. It was a cold winter night in the heart of the city. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional honk of a distant car and the low hum of streetlights flickering above. The air was crisp, biting at the exposed skin of those brave enough to venture outside. In a dimly lit alley, a man named Daniel sat on a piece of cardboard, his only shield against the unforgiving concrete beneath him. Daniel was a man in his late 40s, with a rugged face and eyes that told stories of hardship and resilience. Once a construction worker, he had lost everything: his job, his home, and even his family. After a series of unfortunate events, despite his circumstances, Daniel maintained a quiet dignity. He was resourceful, sharp, and above all, kind. He spent his days collecting recyclables, sharing whatever little he had with other homeless people he met along the way. This night, like many others, Daniel had settled into his usual spot, preparing for another restless sleep. But his routine was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps and muffled voices. Around the corner, a well-dressed man in his early 50s was walking briskly, clutching a sleek leather briefcase. His name was Richard Whitman, a self-made millionaire and the CEO of a successful tech company. Richard was known for his sharp business acumen and a lifestyle of opulence. However, beneath the polished exterior was a man burdened by loneliness and distrust. His wealth had attracted plenty of sycophants, but few genuine friends. That evening, Richard had stayed late at the office to finalize a major deal. Unaware of his surroundings, he chose to take a shortcut through the alley, a decision he would soon regret. From the shadows, three figures emerged. Their faces were obscured by masks, and their intentions were clear. "Hey, rich man," one of them sneered, blocking Richard's path. "Hand over the briefcase, and no one gets hurt." Richard's heart raced. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he said, trying to sound calm despite the fear gripping him. "Take my wallet. Just let me go." "We want the briefcase," another thief growled, pulling out a knife. Now, from his corner, Daniel had heard everything. He peered around the edge of the alley and saw the unfolding scene. For a moment, he hesitated. These men were dangerous, and he had nothing to defend himself with. But then he saw the terror in Richard's eyes, and something inside him stirred. Without a second thought, Daniel stood up and shouted, "Hey, leave him alone." The thieves turned, momentarily stunned. "Who's this? Another loser trying to play hero?" One of them taunted. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm. "I said, leave him alone. There's nothing in that briefcase worth someone's life." The thieves laughed, but Daniel didn't flinch. "You don't want to do this," he continued. "The police patrol this area. If you hurt him, you won't get far." One of the thieves, clearly agitated, lunged toward Daniel with the knife. In a swift motion, Daniel grabbed a broken broomstick lying nearby and used it to deflect the attack. He swung the stick with surprising agility, catching the thief off guard and knocking the knife from his hand. "Run!" Daniel shouted at Richard. But Richard, frozen by the unexpected turn of events, couldn't move. Seeing this, Daniel positioned himself between Richard and the thieves, using the stick to keep them at bay. After a tense standoff, the sound of a distant siren finally spooked the attackers. They cursed and fled, disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of Richard's heavy breathing. Daniel dropped the stick, his hands trembling from the adrenaline rush. "You okay?" he asked, turning to Richard. Richard nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. I think so." You saved my life. Daniel shrugged. Just did what anyone would have done. No, Richard said, his voice steadying. Most people wouldn't have. What's your name? Daniel, he replied, brushing off his coat. You should get out of here. It's not safe. Richard hesitated, then said, Let me take you somewhere warm. It's the least I can do. Daniel waved him off. I'll be fine. Go home. But Richard was insistent. Please, I owe you. There's a diner a few blocks away. Let me buy you a meal. After a moment's pause, Daniel nodded. All right, just this once. The two men walked in silence until they reached the diner, a small, cozy establishment with neon lights casting a warm glow. They found a booth near the back, and Richard ordered 2 steaming bowls of soup and coffee. As they ate, Richard couldn't help but study Daniel. Despite his rough exterior, Daniel had a calm, thoughtful demeanor. It intrigued him. So, Daniel, Richard began, how did you end up in that alley? Daniel smiled wryly. Long story. Life has a way of knocking you down sometimes. But I get by. Richard nodded, sensing there was more to the story. You're a brave man. Not many would have done what you did tonight. Daniel shrugged. It wasn't about bravery. It was about doing the right thing. Their conversation flowed, moving from their pasts to their views on life. Daniel shared stories of his years in construction, his love for fixing things, and how he had once dreamed of starting his own business. Richard, in turn, opened up about his journey from a struggling entrepreneur to a millionaire and the sacrifices he'd made along the way. Despite their vastly different lives, they found common ground in their experiences of loss and resilience. As the night wore on, Richard leaned back, deep in thought. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, yet here was a man who had risked his life for a stranger without expecting anything in return. Daniel, Richard said finally, what would you do if you had a second chance? If someone gave you the opportunity to start over? Daniel chuckled. I'd fix up an old garage and start my own repair shop. Always wanted to, but life had other plans. Richard smiled. What if I told you I could make that happen? Daniel blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. What do you mean? I mean, Richard said, I want to help you. You saved my life tonight. Let me give you a chance to rebuild yours. Daniel stared at him, his mind racing. That's very generous. But I don't know if I could accept something like that. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. It's not charity. Think of it as an investment in someone I believe in. You have the skills and the heart. All you need is a break. After a long pause, Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. All right, but only if you let me pay you back someday. Richard extended his hand. Deal. True to his word, Richard wasted no time. Within weeks, he had helped Daniel secure a small garage on the city's outskirts, complete with all the tools he needed to get started. They worked together to renovate the space, turning it into a bright, welcoming repair shop. Daniel threw himself into the work, his passion and skill quickly earning him a reputation for quality and honesty. Business flourished, and soon he was able to hire a small team, including other homeless individuals looking for a fresh start. Through it all, Richard remained a constant presence, offering advice and support. Their friendship grew stronger, built on mutual respect and gratitude. 1 year later, the shop was thriving, and Daniel had not only paid back Richard's investment, but also donated part of his profits to local shelters and community programs. At a small celebration marking the shop's anniversary, Daniel stood before his team and customers, his voice filled with emotion. None of this would have been possible without the kindness of one man who believed in me when I had nothing. Richard gave me more than just a second chance. He reminded me of the power of compassion and the importance of paying it forward. Richard, standing in the crowd, felt a rare warmth in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to someone, reminded that wealth wasn't just about money, but about the impact one could have on others. In the end, both men found more than they had ever expected. Daniel had his shop and a renewed sense of purpose, while Richard discovered the fulfillment that comes from genuine human connection. Together, they proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most profound rewards. Thank you for watching. If you would like to see more stories like these, don't forget to subscribe.